Hi everyone, my name is Tim Reha, host of Informed Health 2016 here at UCSF in beautiful San Francisco. Nice day out. We have Dr. John Hixson. He's Associate Professor of Clinical Neurology at UCSF, as well as a Deputy Associate Chief of Staff for Clinical Informatics at SFVAMC.
That's right. That's a mouthful.
All right. I got that. I got a big mouth. So, well, super excited to have you down here, John. We had a great panel of basically informed health applied, and we're talking about extended care from the hospital to the home and telehealth, so telemedicine.
Correct. Right. So most of the work I do now, predominantly at the San Francisco VA, involves enabling patients to collect and transmit data related to their health to their physicians and care teams there at the hospital. And so the panel that we just finished was really about those types of technologies, where they stand in terms of their level of evidence and maturity, and how we begin to implement those into the real world, kind of taking them outside of the research setting and making them available to real people.
Now, as a startup guy, I'm always curious to see where the product market fit is and then where things start to get traction. And we're in the space for a couple of years now, and really kind of seeing, it's this year we're going to see stuff where rubber hits the road.
Right. So certainly in this area, I think people are very optimistic, and I tend to be a little bit more grounded in realism. That being said, I'm a huge believer, and so I think that over the next year or two, we'll really see some of this technology move from the research space where people are focused on doing pilot studies and publishing the data to a few real-world kind of implementation studies. And the two areas that probably have the most promise, I think, are the clinical trial space and then the self-insuring employer.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I think more and more companies are going to be willing to take a gamble on using wearables and mobile diaries and whatnot to collect information for phase 1 and phase 2 trials.
Yeah.
That's not real prominent right now, but I think it increasingly will be. And then the second area are employers who are basically taking the bold step of not using a typical insurer, but are trying to provide health insurance for their employees on their own. And that's a real-world environment where the employer has a vested interest in the well-being and the productivity of the patient. And so they may be willing to say, hey, let's use some wearable information, wearable data to try to get better information about our patients and bring them back to work, basically. But for the participants, it's good, too, because I think there's a pretty good alignment between being at work and being happy and also being healthy. Yeah,
and companies are footing the bill and also want to make sure that they're paying for the right things, not just something that has a billing code on it.
Exactly. Right. So it's potentially a better alignment of the technology with the patient's health, which we all know the traditional medical economy really has a kind of backwards, perverse incentive system. And so I think that those are probably the two areas I would say over the next 1 to 3 years that, in my mind, probably have the most promise.
Interesting. And you're with the VA.
Right. So I'm mostly in the VA. A lot of the work that I've done has looked at the use of social media for health and then wearables in the veteran population. I mentioned this during the panel. Traditionally, that's thought of as being a relatively, tech-resistant population. I hope that a lot of our research really turned that on its head and showed that given access and given solutions that really focus on usability, the veteran population and the older population is actually very interested in that. And we're seeing this not just in health, but even in the social media sphere. The older generation is just all over Facebook now. We all know that. I think that it's only a matter of time before that becomes pervasive in healthcare too.
Interesting. Hi, Sandy, my stepmom out in Hawaii. She's on Facebook, and it's interesting. So, we had a lot of interesting people on the panel. What were some of the hot topics?
I think the hot topics were really focused on, again, this emerging space, all of the different applications that are coming out, how we're going to, sort the wheat from the chaff, in that a lot of the applications don't have a lot of scientific validity, and how do we adequately educate patients and consumers about what wearables and what applications are accurate and worth using at home. I think that is really uncharted territory. And again, I do believe that those two examples that I provided will give us a lot of evidence, right? Because obviously a clinical trial, any sponsor of a clinical trial is going to want certainty that the data that they're collecting is accurate before they put it, say, in front of the FDA. And similarly, an employer is going to want to provide good decisions or help their employees make good decisions regarding their health. They want good data too. So if I were in either of those spaces, I would want to know that the applications and the wearables that I was using were highly accurate.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing now is a lot of evolution with ASICs and getting high accuracy plus kind of like micro vibrations or very specific accuracy in data sets. What's cooking for you in 2016? The new year's coming up. We're going to see a lot of new products come out. And what's going to become reality in the next few years?
Well,
what do we hope is going to become?
Think of it more of it as an evolution. Yeah. So I'll never forget when I first started working in this space about 5 years ago. I was talking a little bit about wearables specific to epilepsy and mentioned that the ideal wearable would actually be an implantable. And someone told me, oh, we'll have those in 3 years. That was 5 years ago. So I think that overall it's just an evolution. I would hope that we would see a real focus on wearables that were, quote, medical grade and had moved really beyond the consumer domain with an emerging amount of scientific evidence to support their use, and then that acting as a stepping stone towards integration, again, into these two examples that I gave, clinical trials and the large employer that self-insures.
Excellent. So how do people connect up with you?
Feel free to email me either through my VA or my UCSF email is fine. My UCSF email is john.hixson, Hixson at ucsf.edu. My Twitter handle is poemstudy. That's the study that we ran with our veterans at the VA. So,
well, John, thanks for being on the show. Appreciate your time. Very interesting topics we covered.
Yep, excellent. Thank you for having me.